Well, first of all, when I read it, I recognised that we went. We ended up. I ended up talking to A.S. Byatt, and she is. And I think we might have talked about this. She is not only a great writer, she's also a great scholar of literature, in particular narrative. And the publisher says, "Hey, can we put an anthology of many fairy tales that you've written, grown-up fairy tales?" And there were four, I think, and they felt there should be another one. And she said, "Well, I've had an idea of something I wanted to write," and she wrote it quite quickly, and it turned out to be the longest one, and it was 140 pages, so almost a novella, let's say. And then I went to meet her, and she said, this is way back now, but she said, "Why that story? Because I think the others are better crafted." And I said, "There's something about this story that just feels authentic." And she said, it's because everything in the story is true except for the jinn. So she went to Istanbul to give a keynote talk on narratology, on storytelling. There was an equivalent of her. There was her. The Gunhan, the professor. Yeah. He was. It turned out she dedicated the book to him, and she goes not only to Istanbul but other places. She doesn't stay in the Agatha Christie room, but she refers to it. She couldn't get into the hotel or the Agatha Christie. She was on the other side of the Bosphorus, and she would have loved to have stayed in the Agatha Christie room. So we changed quite a bit in the story, and that was one of them. But everything was true, and her knowledge of the 1001 Nights, the sort of Ottoman history, it all ultimately crept into the film. Yeah, a lot of me is Alethea. For me, jinn is story. The jinn is he represents story, the living story, which Alethea eventually gets to live in her own story, and through story, he's able to persuade her, particularly when he finally sort of proves to her that he proves to her unintentionally that he is not a trickster, by admitting in telling the story of Zofia that he actually tried to stop her wishing. He didn't want her to make a third wish to liberate him. He wanted to be a prisoner, as it were. And that was, quite startling, of course, to Alethea. And therefore that vulnerability was so he represents, in part he represents story, but the effect of stories and how that they can impact on the person who receives them. I think that's what we're trying to do there. As we know, Tilda, because she plays so many disparate roles and always different. I mean, when you think, anyway, you know her work. Hard to get a sense of who she is as a person. But exactly 5 years ago, at the 70th anniversary of Cannes, I happened to be here, and she was sitting on the same table next to me. We started off a conversation that basically just kept going that was a lunch, into a dinner that night, and she was here with Okja, with Bong Joon-ho, and we just we just talked and talked and talked, and I realized, God, it would be fantastic. Her warmth, her intelligence, her she's just a very wise person. You've met her, yeah. So and I thought, God, she'd be wonderful as Alethea, and so we went back, and I think it was the same year there were the BAFTAs where we were with Fury Road, and we bumped into Idris.
Yeah.
Now I knew Idris's work, but actually, talking to him very briefly, I got the full force of his charisma, and the sense that the very important sense that in the same moment you could be his best friend. He was so accessible, and at the same time there was deep mystery in him, like he was unknowable, which is the paradoxical nature of charisma. It what keeps you there. If someone's too removed and mysterious, there's nothing drawing you in. If someone is too familiar, but that's all you get and there's nothing else, then I guess they stop being interesting. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of the charismatic figure and actors. And I saw that there. So, but we had to get an Alethea, so we sent Tilda the script. She responded, read it, saw something in it, and I'm told picked up the phone and called and said, I'm so happy. And then that meant, Idris would fit in. And he read the script, and we had, I don't know if you know the story, but he was talking on the phone, and we were talking, and he said, I'd really like to do the film. Can we shoot all the stories first? And so on. And he said, and also, can you shoot when I'm actually telling her the story, even if it's just to use the voice? I want to be in the act of telling Tilda the story. So that was fine. So he said, look, I've got to get in a car. I'm going to the airport. I'll call you back in 2 hours. And before 2 hours was up, I get a picture from him on my phone, and it's him sitting on a lawn with Tilda Swinton on her farm in Scotland. So he'd flown to Scotland because she has a farm near Loch Ness. He was doing a concert with his DJing at Loch Ness. And so he immediately, and I got that picture, and it was wonderful. And anyway, that's how the two of them came together.
That's extraordinary. That's like the storytelling gods or something.
Yeah, I know.
There.
Yeah. And it was beautiful. I couldn't believe it. I just did not expect it. Yeah. Well, look, two things that you have to acknowledge. One is that the film culture or screen culture is always evolving and changing. That's the first thing, and it's more rapidly than we ever thought. And the other thing is that as you say, we have more content, so-called, than we've ever had before. There definitely was a time when I felt I would see just about every film there was to see coming out, but that's impossible now, literally impossible, and or TV show or streaming or whatever, however you see it. So that really, you are now obliged to make whatever your work unique in some way. I like to say uniquely familiar. We talked about that. I think that's really important. Otherwise, it doesn't have a chance. If it falls too much into tropes or patterns, that it doesn't bring something apparently fresh in one way or another, it just doesn't have a chance. Not to say that if you do something that's unique, that it automatically gets traction. So that's my feeling of it. Cinema itself, there's a lot of, people have talked about cinema falling away, and we're all going to be watching stuff at home. And it's not just faith. I believe it's intrinsic to us to gather with others, to watch stories. It's, if I guess the equivalent that we still go to the theatre, we still go to live sporting events when probably the best way to watch a sporting event where you get close up on players or whatever is at home. and you know and so on. So I think the same will happen to the cinema, but that means the cinema has to adapt like it always has to that.